I was 10 years old when I found moss. I had been exploring the woods behind our house, playing night. I was in the middle of a thrilling chase after Sir Villi, who had just recently kidnapped the princess and stolen the queen's crown. I, the poor stable boy, was determined to defeat him and return both the crown and the princess, after which she and I would be able to finally confess our love to each other. It was a fantastic plot and very enticing. Suddenly, I was at the mountain range, which set the boundaries for where I was allowed to play. The only issue was that Sir Villi did not pay attention to any bounds, and if I were to stop, he, the crown and the princess would be gone forever, and I would be beheaded. So I followed. I had to. The kingdom needed me. As I continued on, I lost track of where I was. I went deeper than I had ever gone by myself, and I did so without realizing it, too intrigued by my adventure. I had just missed grabbing Sir Villi when he pulled a quick move and ran into a cave on the side of the nearest mountain. I sighed, pulled my Spider-Man flashlight out of my adventure bag and followed. I went slower, as quiet as I could. I heard breathing in what I assumed to be the back of the cave, and I followed. The cave was warm and the breathing was very loud. I heard a sound behind me and turned around while continuing backwards. When I turned around, I was directly in front of a massive black nose. Shaking, I moved so that I could see what, exactly, it was that I was facing. I was met with a massive brown bear, bigger than any animal I had ever seen before. Nearly the size of what I imagined an elephant was. The strangest part was the massive green spot on the top of its back. I whimpered quietly, which roused the animal. The eyes opened, and my heart dropped. I ran out of there, scared out of my mind. I had always thought that I had had the ability to bring the things within my imagination to life, but this was not a part of it. I had not put running for my life from a massive animal on the agenda today. I ran and ran and ran, until I was sure it was away. But then I realized that, in my panic, I had ran farther away from home rather than towards it. I was lost, afraid, and it was getting dark. My parents were used to me disappearing for hours at a time, but I always had to check in after supper, and I was not to be out past 8. I curled up under a tree and began crying. It became later, darker and much colder. Due to my distress, I somehow did not hear the bear sneak up until it was right in front of me. When it occurred to me that I was being watched, and I looked up and saw it. It was just staring at me, and it definitely could have eaten me if it wanted. I was scared, but less so than I had been before. The bear nudged me with its nose, getting me to move slightly away from the tree. It then proceeded to enclose me as a means to keep me warm. I snuggled in and fell asleep. They found me that morning, close to my house, curled up to the base of a tree. My mother was sobbing with relief, my father furious, but only because he was afraid. They carried me home, and I couldn't help wondering if the bear was real or not. So the next day, I went back. This time I was smarter, paying attention to where I was going and what I was doing. Finally, I found the cave. I took a deep breath, pulled out my flashlight, and entered. Once again, it was dark and damp yet still warm, and the deep breathing sound was still there. I crept in quietly, until I once again saw the massive wet nose of the brown beast. His eyes opened, dark and beady. But they looked more kind and curious than scary. Maintaining eye contact, I opened my bag and reached inside. I pulled out a bag that I had poured several cans of tuna into, and dumped it out in front of him. He sniffed it and looked at me. I tensed up. Then he ate it in one bite. He looked up at me, asking for more. I didn't have any, and I shrugged to indicate as much. He seemed to understand, and he stood up and led me out of the cave. When he left, he bowed down. I understood what he was saying and climbed up. As it turns out, the green patch on his back was moss. I sat on top of it, holding on tight. He took off running, and eventually we got to a river. I slid down and he began fishing. He caught more in half an hour than I did in my 10 years of life. When he seemed finished, he dropped a fish in front of me. "Oh no, thank you," I held up my peanut butter and honey sandwich, "I'm all covered." He took the fish back and devoured it. I ate my sandwich. "So," I said, "I've been trying to decide what to call you." So I think that I'll just say things and whatever you respond to will be it. I tried many things. Names of characters from my stories, inanimate objects, anything. He didn't seem to respond to anything. I looked down at my watch. Oh, I better get going. It's close to supper, and I cannot have a repeat of yesterday. Once again, he bowed down to let me up. How'd you get this moss? I asked. He looked up at me. Moss? I said again, should I call you Moss? He snorted, which I took as a yes. He then carried me back home. From then on, I spent all of my time with Moss. I was a lonely child. I didn't have any friends, but it no longer mattered. Moss was the only friend I needed. He was a good listener when I wanted to talk, even though he could never respond. Besides, I could always tell what he was saying. We just worked like that. Now, 16 years old, and I haven't gone to see Moss in 6 months. I finally made friends, got a boyfriend, joined activities. I'm not exactly popular, but I'm liked by some and tolerated by others. I'm no longer an outcast and have become a part of the school. But in my glory, I forgot all about Moss. I left him behind. Now I see him again, for the last time. But it's not like before. He is no longer the majestic, graceful creature that he once was. Now he is here, broken, blank, gone. Carried in by my father, only recognizable by his size and the patch of moss on his back. My father is overjoyed, but I am horrified. I left my best friend, the only one who was ever there for me, and now he's dead. And I never even got to say goodbye.